Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 6th episode of the 3rd season of Sheltering Places, our public program here at the New Center. Today's conversation will have to do with what I decided to term as confronting Ottoman's legacy in Greece. This idea came to me after witnessing a very lively conversation last summer in Athens by the two guests of our program tonight. And I immediately thought that because of the relationship between what they were saying and the general conversation around postcoloniality and the problems of Europe, it would be amazing to host this session. Mind you, Athena's also working on a program for the 200th anniversary of Greek Revolution and independence, which will hopefully unfold in March and April if the COVID crisis allows it. So I thought this would be very timely to kind of wrap these things up. And plus, Korinna's a very special newcomer to the New Center, and I'm hoping that I will convince her to teach a seminar for us, which will be a part political, part theoretical, and we will be announcing that very soon. So without further delay, let me go over the biographies of our guests, and then I will do a little bit of a context background, and then I would begin the conversation, okay? Korinna Patelis is a 25-year internet veteran with a PhD in internet communications from Goldsmith College, embarked upon when the web was still in its infancy, just after she read philosophy at Warwick University. These are those crazy Warwick years with Nick Land. Being in the right place at the right time has given her the unique opportunity to research technoculture, political economy, and media and technology, as well as to work across internet businesses and cultures as an academic, consultant, and producer. She combines her experience in digital policy, making large-scale web production, digital storytelling, and activism with academic-style reflection on problems that lie at the heart of the internet and media communications. She writes on commercial software, techno-capitalism, monopoly AI, regulation in a critical fashion, and until recently, worked for the Syriza government as the digital policymaker. She has taught and published in internet studies on undergraduate and postgraduate levels. She has also been training internet professionals to fuel Greece's creative industries for the last decade. Athina Karatzogianni is a professor in media and communication at the University of Leicester, UK. I hope I said it right. She is currently principal investigator for a European Commission Horizon 2020 project, DigiGen, the impact of technological transformation on the digital generation, leading the work on ICT and the transformation of civic participation between 2019 and 2022. Her research has focused on the intersections between digital media theory, resistance networks, and global politics, investigating ICT use by social movements, protests, and insurgency groups. Now, about our conversation tonight. I think for those of us, those of you who are not familiar with the historical trajectory of political and cultural relationship between the Ottoman Turkey and Greece, I think this little bit of timeline is kind of necessary. So following the fall of Constantinople in 1453, the Ottoman army was also able to capture Athens in 1458, kind of like the biggest blows to the end of the Eastern Roman Empire and the Byzantine. And this period, beginning with 1500, had a profound impact in Greek society. Some of the results of this was the emergence of new elites, the complete downfall of the old feudal elite that owned the land, and the rise of different classes of powerful Greek people in the form of those who were collecting taxes, but also those who lived in Constantinople, never left Constantinople, who slowly gained influence and power by, and also the Greek shipping was very important in this period because it played a major role in expanding the commercial network and commercial operations of the Ottoman Empire. And to just cut short this historical analysis and come to sort of like the end of this occupation, we are dealing with basically the rise of Enlightenment ideas among Greek intellectuals who had emigrated out of Greece, or those who lived in Constantinople or today's Istanbul. And slowly, at the beginning of the 19th century, the idea of Greek nationalism kind of like begins to become popular. And what you have is the sort of like ending of the Ottoman Empire, ending the Ottoman rule in Greece through a bit of European intervention also. It's very okay to say that, and I think we will deal with all these complexities in the conversation. But the most contemporary moment of this political conflict, I think, would be to talk about the Cyprus conflict and how the junta regime in Greece that came to power in the late 60s, 1967, and ruled the country till 1974, basically caused a coup d'etat in a fragile government of Cyprus, which then basically caused a Turkish reaction by the separation of Northern Cyprus, which itself in 1974 led to the downfall of the junta and a restoration of democracy in Greece and the beginning of the Third Hellenic Republic. Now, this was a very compact historical timeline, and this is the mainstream understanding of this history. It could be full of fallacies and wrong notions that are just put on a table, but I just wanted to give our audience a little bit of background in this history of the relationship between these two societies and these two countries and these two cultures, and bring in two professionals who have studied this far deeper than I could have ever done to discuss it. And yeah, so basically we're dealing with this relationship, friends. I don't know which one of you would like to begin talking, but I guess maybe we can begin with Korinna. Hello, Korinna. Thanks for accepting my invitation. You just have to unmute yourself or ask. There we go.
Hi, so I'm Korinna. Thank you for the intro. Yes, I was at work when Nick was at work. Yes, it was traumatic. Not because of Nick. And it also relates to what Mo said. So thanks for the intro. So as a little Greek, bubble and squeak, when you first study philosophy, study philosophy, and you're not actually generic Greek, as with, you come from a family that has to do with the Middle East, Alexandria, blah, blah, blah.
Maybe you want to open that up. So basically what you're saying is that you're not a quote unquote pure Greek and you have some Middle Eastern background. Maybe talk about it.
No. Please, 1 minute, please. Let me do this. Thank you. So as a Greek that is not a Greek, so as a human that wants to study philosophy of Greek origin, when you arrive, imagine little me, bubble and squeak, 19. I don't really get the idea that I have to have a nation state, and I just don't get it. I'm raised by people that were basically raised by 3 empires, and this is what I want to start with, actually. So look at this. This is as complicated as the non-identity Greeks have. Greeks don't actually have an identity. So let's go back to where Nick Land and me met, or let's go back to Warwick. So as any average Middle Eastern person, I don't have this cemented identity. I just don't have it. Unlike very many other Middle Eastern people, which I consider Greeks to be, I do have a legacy. I have a myth to fall back on me. So to start feeding from what Mo said, the biggest problem that Greeks have is that we're supposed to actually have an identity when we don't. And we actually are supposed to have one that relates to the West more than relates to the Ottomans. We are supposed to constantly talk about us as cohesively different to the West, not the Ottomans. The Ottomans are merely enemies. So basically, as Greeks, we're historicized. If you're Greek, excuse the many of you from other countries, but I'm talking about mine. If you're Greek, you're not particularly allowed to talk about that empire that defined you in non-historical terms. You're allowed to talk about every other empire that defined you in political terms. But when you talk about the Ottomans, you're not supposed to do it in theoretical terms. You're supposed to do history. You're supposed to run the mile between loads of historical details like Mo started to present, but you're not supposed to understand your basic relationship to power through the Ottomans. You're supposed to understand your basic relationship to power from the West, from somewhere else. But you're not allowed to talk about feudalism. You're not allowed to talk about anything beyond Constantinople. You're about to talk about Ankara? Man, not really. You're not allowed to talk about slavery. You're not allowed to talk about the relationship between Arab slavery and the Ottomans. And most importantly, you're not allowed to talk about the fact that Greece is not exactly a nation. You are allowed to do one thing. You're allowed to non-theorize about Greekness, not theorize about the post-Ottoman experience, and pretend that anything else is historical fact, as opposed to theory that relates to you to power. Athina can now join me, and I'm sure she's as animated as I am.
Well, I mean,
Korinna,
this is all. I think that Mo needs to kind of because you're chairing this. I mean, all I wanted to respond to this is that there is, I think, an affinity in the way we're thinking about this, and that I agree and with a lot of what Korinna is saying regarding sort of the relationship to power, how the Ottoman Empire is not, if you will, like deconstructed enough, and our relationship to it. I think this is like a very crucial point, as well as feudalism, slavery, and all these other questions, that it's not something that you learn at school. At school, you learn to to hate the other, like the way we do history about Turkey and the 400 years during the Ottoman occupation is a very chauvinistic and nationalistic, proud, like nation building, liberty or death kind of way. And I think that this is true. I feel that, and I have the same kind of affinity with what Korinna is saying. That's why for me it is very interesting to discuss it.
But the problem here is that the ideas of nationalism were kind of like, the way we talk about nationalism, it's not an old notion. So everybody was picking up these ideas around like 18th and 19th century, right? Even many parts of Europe where we're discovering nationhood, or what does it mean to be a nation state, and how you can rearrange your history to support an argument for a nationhood. And in a way, you can, I mean, I don't want to argue with you guys against this, but maybe I am, that in a way, being occupied by the Ottoman gave Greeks, or the particular part of Greek cultural and economic elite, a larger incentive to invest more into this idea, because it was in reaction to another form of colonialism or nationalism that was imposed on it, but from the end of the Byzantine Empire, right? So, so this is sort of like something that, of course, historian can bracket out and go like, okay, since everybody's internationalism, we don't even need to talk about it. Greece was a nation, it was occupied and it got liberated, blah, blah, blah. But once you get into the detail, you realize all these conflicting narratives and conflicting ways that will then question the legitimacy of something like Greek nation state, but at the same time, it totally questions the legitimacy of any kind of nation state. Right?
Yeah, but the point is that Greece wasn't a nation. The point is that Greece, when it was conquered by the Ottomans, was an empire that was transformed. Basically, Greece used to be an empire back before the Romans. Then Greekness is totally lost. Then it's a Byzantine Empire. And then the quest for Greece becoming a modern nation state. I've got a great friend, Athina knows him. He wrote this great PhD in Ella, the university.
Florence?
In Florence, yes. A great PhD about these people from Samos that basically didn't want to join Greece. They just didn't like Greece. They didn't want to be part of Greece. Like when the revolution happens, there is this idea that you just quoted, that, 18th century, everybody wanted to come free. There was not everybody in us. They were like the Peloponnesians. Crete becomes part of the Greece as late as 1917. There is no Greekness. So this is great PhD written by my friend of mine that is about this people from Samos. Samos is really between Turkey and Greece, basically. It could be Turkish. It was Turkish. And it's about these two geezers that lived. Basically, they lived in they were born in 1790, lived between then and 1850, and they kept on going, we don't want to join what is going to be called Greece. No. And they're like, and to go back to the idea of the nation state that you're quoting, language is very important. That's what they say. We don't understand the systems of power that have to do with anything Western. We don't understand, and we don't particularly want to join this idea of a nation state. It is very foreign to us. The Ottoman Empire doesn't do nation states. It doesn't even do nationalism. It leaves us alone. It leaves our language alone. It leaves our religion alone. And all it needs is for us to pay some money, deeds. The horrible, because they're violent, the horrible because they exert disgusting force, the horrible when you do not give them the money they want, but they're no missionary. And they don't particularly want us to be doing any of the things that the Westerns want. They're not requiring of us to be part of any nation. And we like that.
How do you account for changes that were made to the land entitlement that really, some historians argue, that really fueled this desire for independence when basically, you know what I'm talking about, but just for the audience here, right? How land used to be divided amongst like Turkish nobility, but then upon their death, it would go back to Sultan, and then Sultan could give it to somebody else, and then they left the peasants who owned their land to their own. But then later on, as the economic pressure mounted on the Ottomans, they had to sort of like change that and allow people to leave land for their children, and they started to confiscate peasants' land, and kind of it was a second change in the way land, particularly agricultural land, was dealt with. Some historians say that had a lot to do with that when the pressure got higher, this equilibrium you talked about kind of changed, especially like with the advent of industrialization and capitalism in England and elsewhere in Europe, right? So I don't know if you have any comments on that, or if Athina wants to talk about that, but like this equilibrium you're talking about changed because of several factors. The other one being just the spread of the idea of nationalism and enlightenment, European enlightenment.
I think Athina should start this, but can I just say one thing? I didn't talk about equilibrium. I didn't say, I didn't say it was good, to put it that way.
Absolutely.
I didn't say it was
there
good.
some kind of.
I said it worked, if that makes any sense. I never said it was good work, but it worked. Athina,
Okay,
wants to talk about neo-feudalism, basically.
Yeah, so I think when I was thinking about this, first of all, the reason I got involved in this discussion was because because there's a 200 years on the 25th of March in 1821, you had the revolution, although they say it was actually started a little bit earlier. It's just that was what went down. So it's 200 years this March. So the idea is that my brother in his theater is doing a festival, and he said, why don't you bring some of your crazy friends like Korinna that you're meeting now to discuss the Greek Revolution? I said, I have absolutely no interest in this. And he said, like, well, why don't you think about this? Because you're broadly, you worked on insurgencies and like revolutions and conflicts because of my background in politics. So I had an interest, although my work now is more on sort of digital networks and ideologization process on those networks. So I was like, oh, I'm not sure about this. But then I started to look into it and thinking about it. There were several aspects that made me very interested. And some of it had to do with the ideology that you're talking about enlightenment ideology, and the conflicts and the tensions and the wars inside enlightenment ideology, and how these actually were transmuted and mutated in a weird way in Greece that had its own like sort of local idiosyncrasies and historical, political, social kind of tensions that were different from where France and the places that the Enlightenment ideology sort of blossomed, let's say, or it came from. Inside those, then those tensions also reproduced in the Greek context as well, ideologically. Not everyone agreed how you should have this revolution in Greece. In fact, like the years before the Greek Revolution, you had different fractions. You had sort of the more aristocratic, let's say, mercantile, commercial class. You had like the people on the ground. You had how do you persuade poor people to take up arms? What do you say to them, right? You had like the ship owners, like all sorts of different fractions as well. You can see how an ideological conflict gets mutated, right, to another place, right? But also you see how many intellectuals, artists, painters, intelligentsia from different European countries actually went to Greece, right, to fight and die, famously, of course, Lord Byron and so on. I was interested in how do you get people, foreign fighters, let's say, going into other people's revolution, fighting for them. The most famous example, I think, in that sense, is the Spanish Civil War, right? Where you have, different sort of artists, intellectuals, activists, revolutionaries going there, right, and dying for that cause, and so on. So I started getting interested.
Was Lord Byron one of those people, or he's in a different category?
He was, he actually, the other interesting thing now here is this romanticization, right? This romanticization of I go and fight for a cause. So when you have like this bored middle class or upper class in his case, so he thought he found a reason to feel alive and to support the cause. And at the time, I think there was
He just didn't want to go kill people in India, for God's sake. No, seriously.
Well, I'm saying
seriously,
that there is this
romanticization. Like, run the mile between Kipling and Byron. No,
well,
really.
I think Keats went to Venezuela. I mean, you have like this kind of like romanticization.
What's a
right?
No, I think that not in a bad way. Yeah. Not in a bad way. Mo, run the mile between Kipling and Byron. What's the difference? What? Kipling lived before Byron.
But maybe there could be another comparison. Those who went and fought on the side of Republicans in Spain a little bit later. Or we had Canadian leftists and socialists who were enlisting to go fight alongside Israel to make sure Israel doesn't lose the 1967 war. So this phenomenon is like this phenomenon of middle class youth in the Western world wanting to
Come
join.
on, I mean, you can go like more recent, fairly recent, when you have people working and going for a war for the for ISIS, the Islamic.
Yeah, absolutely, from England.
From England and brides and all sorts of things. But what I mean, we have famous examples also, and I'm hoping that this colleague is gonna come to the conference, of a person that joined FARC. Right, and like from Europe, went to in Colombia and joined FARC for 20 years, and now, you know, like so these are examples, and I'm interested particularly
for 20 years they were in El Salvador. Or
in Colombia. We're
Sorry.
talking about Colombia. So they left Europe, they went joined FARC, you know, they became like then part of the negotiating team, and like, the whole conflict, you know, they just went there and spent time and got really involved. They were leaders in FARC, right? And they were from European origin with no, do you see what I mean? So I think for me, it is interesting, like to what extent, like in your life world, in the way you do ideology and you understand ideology, right? What is the point, and how does this happen that people leave the country going, this is the cause I need to go and die for, right? It's an important thing, right? It's like a transformation. I think it's an incredible thing when people do that. So I'm interested in that. The other thing I was interested was, of course, we said enlightenment ideology and how translating the Greek case or mutating the Greek case. And the other thing was about these transnational aspects, the geopolitical aspects, because one of the things that is interesting about the situation with the Ottoman Empire is that, of course, there were like powers that were status quo. There were powers that were trying to retain their hegemony, like Austria, right, and Metternich, and all that. There was the threat of Russia. Russia wanted access that they couldn't have because of Turkey. So the Greek revolutionaries relied a lot, and they were actually persuading even the masses, saying like Russia's going to support us, right? Then you have the role of the English, that the British Empire as well in all this. So the actual alliances are very, very interesting of the time as well, and how they were playing different. And I'm sure you know this, Mo, that in Greece we had political parties that were called the Russian, the English, the French, right? You have heard of this, that was their actual name. So people went and voted for sort of the intervening powers, right? And I'm sure you've heard
I'm going to say this again. Sorry, I'm going to be this horrible person. This was my mother, born in Alexandria at 47, that wants to join, and we haven't given the link. But in any case, no, for me, this is important. Wait. Yeah. So mom, when her mom had my name, and she would always refer to Greeks as Romni, as with people that have to do with Romni is not actually translated. It was kind of like around the mile between Athens and Rome. That's a Romnios, not a Greek, a Romnios. That pathetic person that was left there, not real Greek. And you'd ask her, "What are you?" And she would tell you, "I'm Greek." And then when I got my job in Cyprus, they'd ask me, "You're from you're Eladitisa," which means you have something to do with Greece, but you're not really modern Greek. So what I find very interesting is that although, and this is not about my life experience, I'm not that narcissistic, but what I find interesting is if you go around Greece, if you exclude, no offense, Athina, if you exclude very few parts of the mainland, which unfortunately include where Athina comes from, which is Mesologi, which is one of the most difficult places where the Ottomans took slaves twice and killed people twice. If you come from Greece,
that's why you had the Mesologi seeds. That was a very
absolutely. Yeah. But you don't particularly feel this Greekness that everybody feels. Quite the contrary, you feel that there's some core. You feel way more Jewish. You feel way more, which is what I want to talk about now, which for me is the most important bit. All of this conversation is historical exactly because it cannot fathom two facts that are very not facts, two institutions, religion and language. And it keeps on going. Well, historically, the English, historically, Byron, historically, Germans, which are also very important. Because we had I mean, I don't know where this saw, but I implore you people to go and see this amazing fascist, neo-fascist image of our parliament, which used to be the king's house. So when we actually, when the revolution happens, when the Greek, little after the revolution happens, we get a German king. His name is Otto. And he has this great big house, castle, whatever you want to call it, which is now our parliament. And in that parliament building, a couple of weeks ago, the committee that hosts this event for 221 called the 221 revolution. What's it called, Athina? That's what it's called. The committee for the 2021 revolution.
Have no idea.
Projected this neo-fascistic kitsch image on the actual building of
yes,
weakness.
I saw some feed that people actually from your Facebook. I saw the feed that you posted of the kind of like a sound and a slideshow that actually it's an art form invented by a Greek artist in the 60s, very well known. I forgot the name. He brought it.
Yeah, exactly. No, but exactly. So this is
right?
angst. It's this angst. It's this angst. It's this kind of like Byron didn't sell it. We're not a people. We can't understand ourselves as people, but we will always anxiously go, we're one. And you're like, really? Anxiously tell my grandma, we're on me. And you cannot, we're one. And this angst, for me, has a lot to do with what I said before, with the fact that in getting rid of the Ottomans, and we didn't even get rid of them because there's no we. No, there's no we. There's no we. In a good way, like there is a we with Armenians, there is a we with us, but there's no we as with a nation state.
So do you say?
And for me, what?
You say that also thinking about how it was the decisive blow given by the Navy of like European powers and the Russian pressure that kind of ended it, because you say that it wasn't really a fully local resistance. It was also the time had come for the larger world powers to intervene and cut Greece off Ottoman, or you say we mostly because of the other stuff that you were talking about? Because I think there's an element there also that like it wasn't just like bored middle class people like Byron who were going and fighting. Actually, at some point, the governments of France and England and Russia got interested in supporting Greek independence or Greek nationhood and started to like put pressure on Ottoman Empire. And we all know that that was a major blow to the Ottoman.
Yes, but that was territorial. That was territorial. If it needed the myth of a cohesive populace.
I think you're talking about the phantasmatic logic, you know, like she's talking about the ideological regime rather than, you know, like what you're talking about is what ended it. Of course, again, it wouldn't have been possible. It's like, okay, if Obama doesn't say to the Egyptians, I congratulate for your entrepreneurial spirit during the Arab Spring, it's not recognized by the US as them having a revolution.
No. We were not Egyptians. When Nasser kicked out, okay.
I'm just made an analogy that you have to have a
for me the
of a revolution for the revolution to
Cyprus.
Right?
Cyprus got rid of the English in 1965. Nasser got rid of the French and the English in 57. We cannot sit here and talk about Greeks as getting rid of the Ottomans in the 20 whatever century, because we all know, I will repeat this, that we were not a populi. That doesn't mean the Peloponnesians didn't want to revolt. And it doesn't mean that the Ottomans were not horrible. So let me, I don't need to talk facts. We don't need to talk facts. Let's go forward. For me, this is the important bit. And Russia is also the important bit. And so is the church, and so is language. For me, what I feel is so interesting is that if you see Greece and the Ottoman Empire from an Ottoman Empire perspective, you don't see any of this thing. All you see is Kemal trying to modernize aspects of the Ottoman Empire. All you see is pure, horrible violence. I will read this. I mean, I'm not being pro-Ottoman in the slightest. What I care about is the narratives that exist now. So if you see these narratives from a post-Ottoman perspective, as opposed to a post-Western Empire perspective, if you see the Ottomans as your basic empire, that went wrong. And then Kemal as their way of modernizing. And after that, the revolutions of the Arab world that of course related to the Ottomans and of Eastern, then you have a very different understanding of what is happening right now, which is why I'm going to tell Athina. Athina and me had a great conversation about.
Yes, we did have fun discussing this because of this new
which is why
the tech giant.
What?
No, we had another one recently about the new fiefdoms and the.
Thank you. No, that's the point. Which is why. One last thing. I'm gonna cue Athina in a good way. Which is why, so there's a very famous, not very famous, a very funny moment where a friend of mine, very good friend of mine, that heads the Greece's mobile union of operators. So he's as big as it gets in tech. And he calls me and is like, oh my God, I cannot cope with immigrant flows. Please, you are more political than me. Please get me a solution. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, Korinna, every single Turkish telecoms operator has won every single award that has to do with being great in neoliberalism ever invented. We are not gaining any of them. I don't know.
Thank you. That's great. Okay. All right. Well, I mean, you've written about this, the big gap with intercommunications in Greece. What were this? So you can talk more about the Greek situation. That I can never do that. But we were discussing two things. One is that the Ottoman Empire, the feudalism of the Ottoman Empire, was different than the feudalism of Europe, like in the European context, that there was a difference there in how it worked organizationally, logistically, like everything. It was very different, and it was more about that we're discussing. That difference meant that like territories that then emerged as nation state after the decline and the sort of the breakdown of the Ottoman Empire, that these countries have something in common, which has to do with having been under occupation, like being part, let's say, forced to be part in the Ottoman Empire. That was one point that I think is important, that we felt when we're discussing it, that there was some commonality in countries that have been part of the Ottoman Empire, in a very specific way of how the population sort of is used to do political culture and various other things. That was one thing that we're discussing. The other has to do with
wait a minute, before why the Ottomans were not interested. They were interested in money.
Yeah,
They were
okay,
not particularly
yes.
this is what I'm saying. They were not interested. No, I didn't. All I'm trying to explain is
They
that
were not offering ideological register. They're just raw
exactly that's
violence,
the
raw
point.
money. We want your money.
They
Give us
didn't particularly want. They were not missionary. They didn't want to facilitate. At least not as late as the revolution. Maybe before they did. But in general, they were like, as long as you shut up, gave them the money, and let them move around territories they cared about and use force when they wanted to, they didn't particularly want the missionary talk.
What they didn't
No, let me
to civilize and have a cup of tea and build red works and like do all that and build infrastructure. Second point, sorry, I just gonna finish.
Go ahead.
Point that was the important point after this. So there might be like we have had this discussion about that there might be commonalities in territories that then emerge as nation states, right? And to be a nation state, you have to suppress minorities. There's a fear of small numbers. You know, Padure has talked about that extensively and so on. The second point that we found very interesting was that the type of raw power and money and basically not caring what happens as long as I get my money is like this logic of tech giants today. Right. And we started discussing this neo-feudalism, right? Like this bizarre thing where it's only in the last 5 years that really people started caring about, oh, are they regulated? Are they taxed? You know, is this kind of thing that they seem to have like just gone on as a digital kind of overloads, basically, you know, gone into the territories, digital cloud, digital lands, like grab them, basically, digital grab, like they used to do, like in the feudalist kind of era. And then the rest of the gig economy workers, the serfdom, this despotism, like people have been talking about, right, is going on. And that like creates also the like this gap of like 1%, you know, of the people having all the money, like having like half the money of the world in like a few years and all that kind of stuff. So you have like almost like a feudalistic kind of moment, neo-feudalist moment happening. And I think that the pandemic could potentially make this even worse, that it was going like in that sort of sense. But now if you look at what's happened, let's say with Bezos and so, you have like this overlord, right? Like he doesn't particularly care. Maybe like he'll be charitable and, you know, like give some of his millions for the climate thing or whatever, right? But you have like this very almost like a neo kind of feudalist kind of scenario. Now, whether it's going to be the neo-feudalist of the British or the French or the Ottomans or the whatever, but we seem to be going in this kind of bizarre direction in how, you know, like social life and political life is happening at the moment. And people want that. They want the big despotic man that comes and saves the day. And they wanted it because they elected, you know, several individuals like that, or not elected them. They just don't seem to be moving away, like Putin or Erdogan or, you know, or Trump or whoever. So I think that, I mean, for me, what is interesting is that if we are in such a moment, where is the hope in all this? Like, is there a hope, you know, or is it no? Because we can't just go romantic again, because it seems to be like this, oh, if we go romantic again, we can have some hope, right? So this is what the problem is for me. Where do you go from here? If this is the new feudalist moment here, where do we go? Because romanticism is not going to save the day, and me going and fighting in Venezuela, right? So what do we do?
Let me bring two things up. First thing I wanted to bring up was in relation to what Korinna was saying, and that is, you know, as a teenager growing up in Iran with like the very good translation industry, I was in love with Kazantzakis' work, and of course, the Liberation or Death novel. I remember I read it for the first time in one night. I stayed up and I read the whole book in one night. Captivating story, characters, it's just incredible, right? And the sense you picked up from the way he narrates this relationship is a kind of an exaggerated sense of humiliation that Greeks suffered under. So at least if this is synthetic and it's not real, according to what Korinna was saying, but for a lot of people who go through this historical narrative through sources like Kazantzakis, They saw ideological aspects to it. They saw a kind of like the cultural humiliation that supposedly Greeks suffered under Turks, that continued on in places like Crete until a little bit later, right? That he's talking about, right? And actually, you can say kind of fuels the kind of movement. I forgot the Greek word, like this desire to be joined to Greece. That was part of what the whole
NOC.
Yes, NOC. That was part of like the Cyprus's kind of like move, right? So yeah. So how do you account for that? For that kind of like built-in kind of like ideological resentment and cultural resentment that we can maybe even argue that these authors or intellectuals or the cultural elite added to or put
Well,
fuel
this is
on
what
fire.
you have to
No, let
tell
me
to
just say it,
poor
let me just
people to
finish it.
go and like, get them to die, to fight for you. You have to persuade poor people to go and die for you. You have to do it
Yeah, but
some way.
also, as also response to Korinna's, like, 19th century is an era in which language becomes important everywhere.
Can I answer?
Yeah,
I'll answer
so
in an even better way. I'll answer in an even better way. Wait.
I
because
thought
I
language didn't become important until Derrida.
Gaddafi.
Language became important.
Hello, Gaddafi. Yes, which cannot compare to Kazantzakis for his longing of Greece. Portrays Ithaca not as the actual island. I mean, he's not a bloody moron, is he? So my answer is, when Zoba the Greek, the movie, was made, Sirtaki, which never existed, yeah, was actually literally invented to animate and dramatize Kazantzakis' longing, his pedestrian tread for that peasant-like person that felt he needs Greekness. But he felt he needed Greece, Greece, Greece. Gaddafi said, Ithaca is an idea of Greekness. So to go back to the two narratives, the sense of belonging to a Greekness that you read as a child was of course there, but it wasn't about modern Greece, or it shouldn't have been. I mean, I'm sorry, no offense, not in a bad way, not in a bad way at all. When there's a great novel, an autobiography by Edward Said, which is called Out of Place. You've read Out of Place. So in Out of Place, Edward says, in the first page, he literally says, ever since I remember myself, I felt out of place. To go back to language. If you ask Kazantzakis, where does our language come from? If you ask any person that believes in modern Greece, what is modern Greek? They would never accept, ever, that it's a Jewish language, ever. There is no way they would ever even. So the aroma of New Greekness is an interesting one. And again, as I said, it was an invented one. I will repeat this. The Hollywood invented a dance to animate one of your favorite novelist
characters.
Novels. And thank God, and we do it. Ta-dam, ta-dam, ta-da-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. Maya, no, not in a bad way, in the slightest. But what we know, when I say we, I mean people that are of Greek descent, that do share a language, is that modern Greek is made out of 5 ethnic groups. Cretans, Slavs. Do you want me to name them? Okay, fine.
If you want to.
No, actually, I want to go back to before the history of it. I want to go back to why. Sorry, I want to do this. What is the most important bit is that Greece hasn't produced an intellectual that could talk about a post-Ottoman experience, and neither has post-Ottoman life. Everybody talks about Greece as if it's not the Near East. Everybody talks about Greece as seen by Byron's eyes, or anybody, or actually the Germans too. And for me, what is interesting is not the historical fact. They said, you know, in the committee in 2021, Mazawa is actually a part of it, okay? So we have great historians that will tell you, listen, in Thessaloniki, the reason we had Jews, that the Germans were killed, was because the Spanish kicked them out, and they went and settled in Thessaloniki. And actually, Mazawa starts Thessaloniki with a great line that says, Thessaloniki is the Piccadilly Circus of the Balkans. And it's the same narrative. It's the Kusturica narrative. It's a narrative according to which we, as a nation, don't exist. All that exists is a historical account with a
This is going
on.
This is going to the Greek Revolution. Never happened. Did not take place. You know,
of
it's
course
like
it
the
didn't.
Baudrillard thing.
Of course it fucking
It did
didn't.
not
Of course
happen.
it exceeds my profanity. But to go back to Mo, but to go back to what Mo said, the feeling you had, you know, I used to read Kipling, pathetic as it might be, and Shelley, pathetic as it might be. And I would fantasize about other places. And it's great that you read Karatzogianni.
It was great. I still love the memory of staying up all night and reading that book. I remember that night vividly.
And we have loads of others, but I will repeat.
No, but I was reading that in the context of Iran being occupied by mullahs. So as a teen Iranian reading that, for me, the identification was that these people came from, Ayatollah Khomeini and his team came from Iraq, and they're like kind of like bringing this like Arabic religion to us, and us, the secular Iranians, are experiencing what Greeks experienced under Ottoman. So that was the point, the hook for me was that, right?
But also because of Karatzogianni. Because of Karatzogianni, though, I mean, Karatzogianni was famously excommunicated by the Greek church, right? So there's other reasons probably why you were attracted by him, right? Because he was a nationalist. He was
secularity.
Sorry, I want to ask something. Did they tell you you're blonde? Or no, seriously, in our history books, you get to come like, no, sorry, there's a very funny moment where I asked my son, when and where did the Persians come from to the ancient Athens? And they look at me and they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, what color of skin did they have? What hair did they have? And why do we talk about the Persians here? Because we really do. And they look at me and they're like, what do you mean? We were blonde. And I'm like, really? We were blonde? And the Persians, what color were they? And who was Hermes? And Hermes, sorry. And what is that going to do with Ithaca? And where's that narrated? And what does it got to do to Herodotus? So why am I saying this to you? As a Greek, even if you're born in modern Greece, or you could be born in Ellie Island, or in Cape Town, or in downtown Melbourne, Australia, the myth you smell and get fed is not about modern Greece. It's about Greekness. And that myth doesn't relate, that ideology doesn't relate to the Ottomans. And then when you come back here, when you go back to the current situation, you have no tools to relate to that. You did. You actually explained. You did. You just did. You did. You explained to me that, listen, I read your Karatzogianni's when they were talking to me about enemies. But we don't exactly have enemies. The Ottomans are not exactly enemies. The Turks are. We don't exactly know if we are the modern Greece. to put it bluntly. Exactly because everything is told in historical terms and not in theoretical terms. Exactly because the Ottoman Empire is not understood as an empire, but it's understood as something that had power, and we are not understood in relationship to the myths and the ideologies that procure our population, our whatever, Greekness around the world. It's almost like Gaddafi and Kazantzakis work on different levels. Does it make sense to you or not?
Absolutely. Athina, you threw something into the conversation that is a very important sort of like, I don't know, you just threw it in casually, right? And I just want to make sure I got it right.
That's how I do things, casually.
You said like,
Yes.
the way tech giants are eating up the world is very similar to Ottoman Empire feudalism, right? Did I get it right?
Yes, you did.
So
But
that's
we said it together. It came out when we were discussing together, because this argument has been made. I think I must have left it downstairs where I was cooking. Kotkin made that, right, about neo-feudalism, neo-medieval,
Yes.
towards
No,
this
but
neo-medieval,
you're
but I'm not sure it's the medieval, like the feudalist that he is talking about, the European one. I think we're in the hardcore Ottoman one, because you see what I mean. I think maybe we can move on to the better one, the less raw one, that was exploitative, yes, but it wasn't sort of like stealing your children, right? Like stealing your children, I mean, literally, like stealing our children, meaning they are on screens like 24 hours a day and stuff like that. So I'm just exaggerating, to make the point. But when me and Korinna were discussing this, we're discussing this rawness of how things were happening, because there were the fact that it was never discussed where the internet technology was going. It was never debated. It's like this planning and how it was happening was like basic corporates and states, like, coming together, some NGOs pretending that were, like, funded by the other two, like coming together to plan the internet, basically, right? So it's like this very weird global trusted networks that work like this. And right now, the result of this is you have a lot of acceleration in this area that is basically uncontrollable, unregulated, untaxed, and all the efforts to try to do something about it that don't seem to be exactly working. We're supposed to have a digital tax here in the UK. It hasn't happened. The French that have tried to do it, they might get some money now. Apparently, they're going to get some taxes. But you can see, like, the GDPR was supposed to protect privacy. Has it worked really well? We're not so sure. So you have like this idea, and we're laughing because when Korinna said, and the Ottoman comes, Athina, and says, give me your money, like that, right? And I said, what? And Zuckerberg goes to Senate and says, I'm just selling ads, Senator. But it's like, really, just because he says it in a kind of like a Star Trek data kind of way, it doesn't mean that there isn't any violence on this, right? There is like some form of like technological violence in a way. And I don't mean it in the, I mean it as a figure of speech, right? But there are occasions where you had Facebook, for example, be used as a cleansing tool, right? As well, and you have impacts of what's happening online. It has an actual impact. Now, we're not exactly sure in terms of whether it is influencing elections to the extent that has been talked about, the Cambridge Analytica scandal, disinformation, and all that. But basically, what we can see definitely is that there is sort of these masses and masses of billions, basically, in the hands of like 5 GAFAM corporates, tech corporates at the moment. And it's kind of like, it does look like these are the overlords, and the people, like the different estates and how they work. We have an Intelligatia, that is basically going and giving some reasons, doing the, social justice and the new hierarchy of identity politics. Oh, you can do this if you're polite and you respect, this and that, you can be part of our sort of team of trying to deal with privacy and hate speech and whatever. So the way the thing is done is almost like a new clerisy, right? So the new clerisy is that if you go into the ethics for these tech corporates and the identity and equality and diversity and all that kind of stuff, you'll be part of this kind of elite world of like that used to be like the priesthood and you know and the aristocracy, and you can be part of that world, right? And the rest of the people can go away, you know, the yeomanry and the whatever, like and the poor, right? So this is like, we're discussing this, we're having fun with this concept that is not a new concept, other people have said it. It's just, what was interesting was that the Ottoman Empire is actually more closer to what is going on right now, rather than the more ennobled or like civilized missionary sort of British and so on.
I want to say something. I want to talk about force again. I think that one of the most interesting bits. We'll discuss something. Let's go back to empire and force. So we've got a huge empire that is still not considered an empire. Like, we still, again, I'll read this. We still do not speak of the Ottoman Empire in post-colonial ways. We just still don't. Under the idea that there were no colonies and everything was just basically conquered territory. That's bullshit. But in any way, so you have an empire that's huge. And it's one of the few ones that hasn't produced GAFAM. It hasn't. It just hasn't. China has, India has, America has, Europe hasn't, and neither has any Arab nation, including Turkey. Any Ottoman nation. Russia has. And you suddenly have this kind of like brute, Republican, disgusting platforms that are as literally like, blah, 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 I've gone you, hello, I come from like, the like Second Amendment bastards that conquered the world through a bipartisan agreement just after Iraq was invaded, and literally brought raw force, as with my gun, my church, my Facebook, I love it, to the world. And then you have a Turkey that is kind of like, I can mark Turkey because it was civilized, but it still represents what the Ottomans were about. It still represents that place where force is force, and that's where politics are. It still represents neo-feudalism. It still represents what feudals look like, where there is not even an understanding of what a civilized institution would look like, let alone a balanced one. And you have GAFAMs that represent this, and they also represent post-industrialization. They also represent the idea that, listen, we're not about exploiting the mode of production. Actually, we don't give a flying fuck about the Industrial Revolution. We're about exploiting pure territory, as with digital territory, and basically using force. Neoliberalism is not exactly like us, in the sense that it's a little bit more abstract, but quite frankly, all we care about is territory and force. And for me, that's spectacular. The relationship between the way in which neo-feudalism and Turkey, and in general, the post-Ottoman way rules, to this kind of like, we don't care about the mode of production. We don't care about justice. We don't care about anything. We care about the exact same thing American republicanism does. As Athina said, despotism. We care about forcing you to do shit. I'm sorry about my profanity.
So you agree with this affinity that Athina identifies?
Yeah, I think to put it that way, I think there is something very interesting about how brutal the Ottoman Empire was, and how years down the line, centuries down the line, neo-feudalism goes back to pure brutality, pure feudal brutality, as opposed to missionary capitalism. It goes back to the idea that, listen, people, we're not going to even sell it. We're going to go, and for me, there's also another bit to it, which also had to do with the Ottomans. The Ottomans used to say, I don't care about what you're doing. I care about your land extracting value for me.
So, but now it's not the land, it's the attentional resources, it's the cloud space, is the screen land.
It's both. Right? It's both. It's both. It's rigging also. It's also rigging. It's both. It's about conquering the virtual space and the resources, as with rigging, as with fracking, as with, it's basically loitering the lost territories that exist with brutal force. And without an understanding that we need institutions for this. That doesn't make any sense. And I think that the reason for which, if you go, last thing, I'm sorry I'm trying you, but last thing. If you think of the way in which the EU hasn't been able to do anything with GAFAMs and hasn't been able to do anything with Turkey.
Bought them off. I mean, what do you mean? I mean, like, what do you mean? Hasn't been able to do anything. Like, like I've been trying, it's like they're bought off. I mean, like, what do you mean?
Exactly.
Oh, sorry, this is my crazy Greek side now. Like, you have serious. I was trying to be very English about this, like and proper, but now I've gone like this now.
No, but it's the same thing. Didn't the Turks do it? It's the same thing. It's a kind of like, welcome, okay, you Turks, you force, okay? And there's a spiel according to which that raw gun-driven, horrible force-driven mentality, whereby all you care is about exploiting territory, whether this is virtual or not, that matters. And you have institutions just going, okay, we'll fine. Well, you're depressed now.
No, I'm just trying to understand the reference you brought that then got Athena going. I think there was a reference to something in England that I just want our audience to kind of understand what was your example and what got Athena excited.
No, because he was saying, the Europe has been trying, to deal with the GAFAM, but it hasn't been.
What is GAFAM?
The GAFAM, Google, Amazon's, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft.
Google, oh yeah, okay. Is the acronym?
So we're talking about GAFAM. They use it a lot in France, so like the sort of the five tech giants. Sorry, maybe there's some of the this is not. We say GAFAM. It's like the five key tech corporates.
So in the 20-minute remaining time, so
what would you like us to do in the remaining 20 minutes? Yes, let's do it.
How do you see the ghost of these legacy sort of like playing out in contemporary Greece, in the actual contemporary, not the historical Greece, not this fictional entity, but the actual society? Because when you hear this a lot from I don't want to call it racist. I don't want to call it racist Europeans, but you hear this myth a lot, right? Basically there's the pure Europe that was never invaded by Catholicism or you know what I mean? Like the North and the white North Europe. And then there's the Europe that was basically the Catholic Europe. And then there's the Europes who were
pigs, the pigs.
Yeah,
the pigs,
and then
Portugal,
exactly.
Italy, Greece,
also,
Spain.
These more horrible categories that the Europe that was occupied by Mongols, and then the Europe that were occupied by Turks. Basically there's this four different categories of Europe, right? From the top to the bottom. Right? Yeah. So basically, how does this history play out in today? How do you see it? And then basically they would just shoulder up and say, what do you expect?
Well, then state formation is not complete in Greece. Starting from there. So the state formation is not complete. There is no state. Okay,
So
in
that was
Greece.
your
I
argument.
think you can meet Greek people are going to tell you that there is no state in Greece. Do not be fooled. There is no state in Greece. The state
I
building
don't agree.
state formation.
There's a horrible authoritative client state. Of course there is. There is a
No,
violence.
I mean, there is no state as like it's fantasized in by somebody asking that question, as in a form of state as we understand it. That basically you have, like in the UK, you have the yes minister state, that you change, you know, the government and there's some sort of state apparatus, institutions, bureaucracies, you know, that stay and evolve and they have an intentionality and a memory, whatever, right? Path dependency, all that kind of stuff. In Greece, it's like, sort of, I don't think that the how the state functions is like a complete haphazard situation. Like it's not as kind of like, it is more chaotic and it's more hostage to the political elite that happens to be in power, right? It's not like sort of, it's not the way people understand states, right? In the Western context, it's a different thing. So one of the implications, I think, if you start thinking about this, is that the reason, for example, that the tax, right, that the famously like, oh, Greeks don't pay tax and all that kind of stuff. In the PASOK era, I read recently a paper by one of my colleagues, Gerasimos Moschonas, who was talking about this period, about the fact that there was not like the tax system was not actually ever working, in the sense that there was so much tax evasion, and the state, that sort of the PASOK government, how they were spending money, all right, like they was doing like what they were doing without kind of like actually getting taxes in, right? So there's like this complete bizarre thing. I mean, he was talking more about, of course, the ideological problems that had to do with sort of the weak internal like logic of the ideology of PASOK, blah, blah, blah. Like that was his point. But what I picked up from it that is interesting is like, what kind of state do you have, right? Now you have a state that for many years like was hostage and is now hostage, like recently hostage to this far right wing logic.
I want to interrupt you. Introduce, no, seriously. Do what you're doing and translate for Mo and our audience a beautiful Greek word that has to do with tax and the Ottoman Empire.
Haratzi.
Haratzi
was called like Haratzi.
No. Kephalophoros and Haratzi.
Kephalophoros, okay.
Kephalophoros. Head tax.
Yeah.
Haratzi. Castration tax. As with, I chop off your hands. No, for me, this is important. And do what you're doing in relationship to the Greek debt and the IMF in a good way.
Okay, like I want to try to come back to the question. There was like this obvious story about neo-colonialism, because you've heard about this also during the Documenta 14 stories about how Germany came, you know, like, and spent like their 35 millions, you know, and then this and that, right? So there is this neo-colonial thing. But what the point of the discussion that Korinna is bringing, I think is very important, is that there was no post-colonial discussion in Greece about the Ottoman
and that Haratzi and Kefalophori, the idea that Ottomans could chop off any part of your produce in Greek, no, we're not disagreeing. In the Greek post-Mnemonian Greece and before, the word Haratzi, as with we're about to go and steal, literally go axe your savings. The idea that the IMF could do that and do Kefalophoros relates to the Ottoman legacy big time. Exactly, because like Athina said, we don't have a welfare state. We don't even have a state that works. We have a client state, a Latino-generated state from hell, produced in the midst of a post-war, a civil war, and a junta in between, in the middle of Europe. And then you have the IMF and the EU going in using Ottoman force. I will repeat this. Using the type of non-institutional understanding that exists. And of course, Athina, you agree with me, institutions are not exactly only Western, because we also need to talk about Gagarin here. We also need to talk about the idea that, and Tito, no. So to answer most question, the mere idea that our problem right now is that we were Western is half the problem. We never were.
Exactly. Mm.
And that's why I actually think, Mo, I really believe this. I really believe that this is the best thing. And to go back right now, I don't know whether you know, but right now, people are dying because like Athena said, we didn't have a state. They're dying. We don't have a Wilson state, and people are just literally dying because of Corona. But the infrastructure and the development that was supposed to have been monitored, introduced by the West, and whatever, didn't exactly really pervade the Ottoman structures. What is extraordinary in all of these centuries, and what is extraordinary to go back to when we told us, I want 20 minutes when we don't go back to the 18th century. That's what he said. And I'll repeat, man, the Greek church still, and the Greek family still, as institutions, still run and have power in this country. And that for me means that unless somebody can see Greece through a post-Ottoman eye, as with the Ottomans didn't exactly kill the modern Greek church, did they? They didn't exactly, they didn't.
They gave it power.
Well, Syriza did neither.
Exactly.
Just to say, right? Okay, right.
No, you want to say something, sorry.
Although I did try.
Athena, did you say neither did Syriza? Did I hear that right?
Yeah. That's what I said.
Like
Yes, I'm come out with all sorts of casual things, casually.
Yeah.
that's how I do it. That's how I do it, casually.
Didn't kill the Greek church, but neither did Syriza.
Yeah, well, I mean, Korinna can tell us a little bit more about that as well.
Put on a spot to explain a little bit because of her involvement with Syriza, right? But don't spoil too much, right? Because
no, I'm not doing anything. Me, I'm
saying don't spoil too much.
I'm innocent.
For
and casual. Yes.
Yeah. So how did Syriza deal with this post-invisible, not talk about post-Ottoman legacy in those years that they were in power?
And the church, the say about the church.
And the church, which is part of it.
So I don't know if people watching know that we had a junta, and at some point the students revolted, and that the day in which the student revolution that overthrew the junta, part of which was the occupation of Cyprus, not because Cyprus was Greek, but because Greece was a Cypriot ally. Cyprus just got rid of the English, and just after it gets rid of the English, Greece, its main ally, is under the junta rule, and the Turks invade. So there's a very famous date in Greece, which is the 17th of November, where the students rose after 6 years of junta rule procured by the Americans, and they rise up and they revolt. Many people get killed. It's really nasty. And it's celebrated year after 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 year. And of course it is. And it's a joy. It's very difficult because there are very many people from Syriza that have parents that were literally tortured. Not literally tortured, as with Assange as a walk in the park. Tortured, exiled. So I worked for one of them, who was number 2 in the Syriza government. But that's the point. Not he wasn't tortured, but his father was. Papas, Nikos Papas. So to answer the question, when Syriza rose to the government, it rose with a lot of seriously oppressed and seriously defeated folk. It didn't exactly revolt. It represented a bunch of people that were really, really defeated. And that's very different from anything else. So the church was kind of irrelevant to them. They didn't particularly feel that the church was more fascist or more of a problem than the power they were fighting against. They didn't particularly feel communist in the sense of denying the Eastern Greek church. Because whether elect or not, the Eastern church in general is also quite a great antidote towards Calvinist Germany and in general a Western type of Christian church, Catholicism, name it. So they didn't particularly feel that the church is the problem. That doesn't mean that they love the church. It meant that during their rule, they would not fight a populist battle that would go, my church, my God. I'll repeat this. I keep on repeating it. It's important. People need to understand that you know, religious fundamentalism and neoliberal capitalism are one. People need to understand that in the US and in many other countries, irrational capitalism includes a really
There is market fundamentalism. Come on.
Eh? Not Islamic fundamentalism.
No, I mean market fundamentalism.
Exactly. And sorry, one direction, 1 minute away, because we're talking about Athena about this. When we go back to the Ottoman thing and why Greeks, and not only Greeks, why very many post-Ottoman nations don't particularly care about e-commerce and GAFAM, the answer is because we were never, the market and us. Are you kidding me? The first McDonald's opened in 48 in the US. The first McDonald's opened in when? 96 in Central Athens. Terrestrial TV reached 100% in the US in when? 55. 81 in Athens. Color, 84. So to answer your question,
broadband.
Eh? No, to answer the question
like
about
this
Syriza.
Broadband, like, you know, like, yeah.
Exactly. So to answer the question about Syriza is a parochial neo-Euro party. Okay, it is not the KKE. I wish it was. And to go back to my 17th of November story. So this year down the line, Syriza split. Syriza's lost, it's defeated. Varoufakis now has another party. The KKE is as strong, but it's now down to 5%. So usually everybody from the left in Greece marches on the 17th of November. That's what they do. We go. Anybody from the middle to the left, we go. This year, we're told you're not allowed to go. And we're like, why? I'm like, because we're now running an urbane style of government, and we now are running a Republican style of government. You're not going to go. Syriza says, okay, we're not coming because of the virus. Why? Which for me is important. And most of the left says it's okay. Why? The answer is the church. The answer is that everybody knows that when people are dying, somebody has to pick up the tab of grieving. Somebody has to be the empire that gives ideology and meaning to what is happening. Not because we're part of the ex-Ottoman Empire, but because we're used to that type of ideology. And for us, that was the church and the family. Athina, sorry, I'm talking too much.
I'm really enjoying this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
What do you mean? You want more of me?
Mo, what are your impressions? I'm like very curious about the time that you have been in Athens, quite a few, maybe even like about a dozen times now, or
yeah, like 4 or 5 times.
Oh, right. Okay. So what is your experience of, do you see that there is this sort of a Greek culture and the Greek people and the whatever, for like, have you feel this monolithic national culture?
What you feel is that what you immediately feel is the institution of family, much more than the institution of church. Like, you understand how so much of the welfare of the societies actually operate within the family. Family takes care of the family. That, you see it everywhere. And you go like, okay, if there's no social housing, as I learned from Korinna in one of the trips, well, the family takes care of the social housing, because your mother will give you housing, or you give housing to your mother, or like somehow the uncle has a house where you're going to live there for free for 6 months until you find a job or something, right? So that is really like was highlighted for me, the role of family as an institution that sort of like does a lot of the work that this absent
But
state.
that is not a Greek thing. You can say that about Italy, for example, parts of Italy or parts of India,
Yes,
or parts of, I don't know, like, I mean, family, like, is, you know.
I wasn't aware of that.
It's not a Greek thing necessarily, right? I'm just saying that, have you, because for me, when I go back.
Greece has the larger home ownership. Go back to the feudal thing. The reason for which we have
this is the new yeomanry, is the homeowners, right? So this is what
But we were never denied of we didn't have big feuds. The Turk, the Ottoman would say, "What do you own?" We'd say 5 acres, and they're like, "Okay, fine. How much do I get?" Well, whatever.
This is the dialectics.
It was never. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No, for me, this is important.
No,
and the
I want
also
to ask him, because I want to ask you, how have you experienced in the political culture, the Greek political culture? Let's say that there's a Greek political culture, right? Like, how have you experienced the tensions and the conflicts inside it? Because at some point, you know, it went also from sort of the left and the right and the center, like the traditional thing. You have like this abrupt thing where PASOK goes down, you have the mainstream parties, you have like Syriza coming up. This is like major shifts, and anti-austerity, pro-austerity kind of, pro-memorandum kind of stuff. And you have arrived recently, right, in a like what is a clearly a right-wing government, pro-business, market fundamentalism, like flirting with the whatever, you know, with the far right, like ridiculous things are happening, like, you know, all this stuff. It pretends that it has saved the people, right, in the first wave. Everybody, even centrist friends of mine in Greece, have believed that, oh yes, Athena, like, you know, if it was Syriza, what would they have done? The right-wing government, they saved us, right? It's like this bullshit story, right?
Off.
Yeah. Sorry, are you switching me off? Okay, so that's why I made that even centrist, like, or like people that are like on the left, supposedly, like the bought that narrative, like wholeheartedly, like, yeah, you know, what would happen, you know, like he saved us, you know, like this government saved us, and you know, like, not even. Like, there seem to be, there's an autism for me when I go to Greece. There's an autism, and I don't mean it autism like. I don't mean it in the clinical, you know, sense. I mean that Greece.
She has too many middle-class friends. That's what she means.
I mean that Greece always feels that they're acting in the world as a political actor, but actually they don't understand like what's happening in the world, what is going on.
Athena,
right?
that's why I said family. That's why I said family. Nobody that has a family as a welfare state and a church as a welfare state, two different institutions that have lived through centuries of wars and pandemics, could ever understand anything evil if they're not. We have a very new modern middle class. We actually we have the most new middle class in the entire Europe.
Man, 20% is 22% is over 65 in Greece.
No, middle class. Middle class.
The middle class is like happened like during the PASOK period. This is where the middle class thing, like actually the sea
exactly.
Of middle class,
do you know of any other?
All this kind of thing.
Do you know of any other Central EU country? We were country 11 to join the EU. Do you know of anybody else that had such a low GDP before 2000? The answer is no.
Well, that's because of geopolitically where we are and all that, like that story.
To go back to what Mo said.
NATO, Turkey, like,
to
go back to war, like all this kind of stuff.
No, to go back to Mo on the social housing thing. For me, what is extraordinary, and I hate to do this because we're about to go, but okay, so I shared the video of Biden saying, let's get started. No, for me it's important. For me, it's insane that we're talking about Greece, and your friends are, as if the Balkans were not bombed, and as if the Eastern Church wasn't the only thing that the Balkans could fall back on when shit hit the fan. And extended families. That doesn't mean I like these two institutions. That's not what I'm saying. I never said they're good. All I said is that they define the power politics of our territories in a post-Ottoman fashion. That's all I said. You hate me.
I just want to wrap up because we're past an hour and a half, and also answer Athena, right? Like, the attitude I see is like, you talk to older Greeks and they all tell you, yeah, I was a socialist at some point, I was a leftist at some point, but now I've resigned to this new thing. Totally what you were saying. But amongst the youth, you see a kind of like radicalism and kind of like ideas for a better world that is lacking in other parts of Europe. And that's what excites me about Greece, that the youth is much more to the left of, say, German youth. Just the average middle class youth we're talking, right? I'm not talking about like necessarily like those who are like studying political science or the activist types. I'm talking about average youth. And they're very well aware of this history. They know what's junta. They know what junta did. And the historical consciousness surprises me amongst the youth.
Because they're not in debt, though. They're not in debt. Unlike a German youth, a Greek youth doesn't take out a loan. And that's important. Unlike anybody in Germany or anywhere else.
That's because they still can be romantic then? What are you saying? Because they don't have
No. They literally don't have to borrow to buy a house, Athena.
I mean, I understand that, but
they don't have to borrow to have insurance. No, that's important.
So you mean that they can do that out of the safety net, like be romantically, politically, and wear the Che Guevara t-shirt because basically their life is kind of sorted, but they're never going to get a job. right? So they're never
Yes,
going to
but
get
they
a job or
inherited.
anything.
Yes,
Right?
but they know they will
The
have a
other one
house.
that is good, that is in there is going to basically go and find a job in Germany somewhere else. The Greek youth might like live with their mother and father until they're 35 or 40.
Because they
Yeah,
have a home.
exactly.
They
Yeah.
have
So
a
how
home.
radical do you want to be? Like basically, you always be radical and like kind of sit in. If you don't have a job and live with your parents, you're a teenager for the rest of your life. Of course, you're going to be Che Guevara and whatever. Like
if growing up means being in debt, I think now, come on. If growing up is get a mortgage, grow up, really?
You said that. You're the one that said it. That said, like, but they don't have a debt,
Okay,
Athena. And I was like,
the conversation's getting as fiery as it did at the Zen Beach last summer, which actually made me think about that we should have this conversation. Really interesting.
So you brought us in the right level, again, of where you had the fantasy.
Before we finish, can't you tell us how she does the Zoom look?
The Zoom look. Oh God, what do you mean?
Go back into that background. Come on, go.
Amazing.
No, I want green. How does she do it?
The green. Well, it's like you can do it. I mean,
as a teacher, I can also turn it on, but I usually try to do it like in a real world. Anyways, thank you so much for your contribution, and thank you so much for the conversation. And we're looking forward to your program next March or April if it unfolds in Athens.
Even if it doesn't, I'm gonna like sneak into through Italy and be there, and then we will take it on Zoom.
Hopefully can I have a minute on that, Mo?
And people, we're looking forward to your possible seminar.
I was about to announce my possible seminar.
Yes, go ahead.
People, I'm teaching together with a great comrade called Mateos Timitakis. They used to work with me. I used to work with him. We did loads of things for Syriza and loads of things in digital policy. So we're teaching this crazy seminar called It's called Syriza and I, inspired from With Nail and I. And it's using Syriza and all of those contradictions that Mo just talked about how safe and radical Greece feels, and how at the same time narcissistic all of that feels, and how at the same time desiring that feels. So we're running the mile between a very hardcore political economy of how indebted our country is, of how lame and liberal Syriza was in its rise to power, of how the algorithms didn't really work, and how at the same time there is an oomph, there is something elating about Greek youth and the left proposition here. We hope you join.
Amazing. So thank you, Korinna, and thank you, Athina. And the video will be available to be watched right away if you want to share the link with more people. But we'll share it tomorrow on our social media, and it's also on our YouTube page for anyone who wants to watch. And yeah.
Thank you, Mo. It was a wonderful. I never talk about Greece enough, I feel.
Yes.
So thank you for making me do that.
And looking forward to Korinna's seminar. Talk to you guys soon.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye. Bye, Korinna. Bye, Athina.